Welcome to Season 4 of Might in Motion, the podcast that champions motivation, momentum, mindfulness, and might. I'm Marianna Kinnee, your host, bringing you conversations with inspiring leaders and innovators who challenge the status quo and push boundaries in their careers and lives. Whether you're here to grow, lead, or ignite your own journey, we're here to keep you moving forward. Let's dive in. Guillermo Söhnlein is an entrepreneur, explorer, and philanthropist focused on space, oceans, technology, and conservation. Starting in Silicon Valley in 1998 and now residing in Barcelona, he has helped launch over a dozen for-profit ventures and nonprofit organizations, including Space Angels Network, now Space Angels, and OceanGate. He is currently a founder of Blue Marble Exploration, Space Bridge Partners, and Vertivo Music, as well as founder of Humans to Venus Foundation. He has organized and led 6 ocean exploration expeditions using crewed submersibles and was admitted into the Explorers Club in 2012. A former officer in the U.S. Marine Corps, he earned his AB in economics from the University of California at Berkeley and his JD from the University of California College of Law in San Francisco. Guillermo, welcome to Might in Motion.
Thank you. It's great. It's great to be here, and I was excited to hear your 4 M's. I love those 4 M's.
I love alliteration. It just makes things easy.
Yeah, no, it's great.
And I'm excited to talk to a Marine because my husband's a former Marine, and
Hello.
a JAG officer, which I think is just super cool because we are currently we're watching JAG. I don't know if you ever watched JAG growing up, but it's all about, lawyers in the military.
Yeah, I watched it a little bit. It's kind of funny because I get that a lot, and I also get A Few Good Men, right? The
Yes.
alliterations to A Few Good Men. So just to kind of clear the air a little bit. So JAG is Judge Advocate General. So JAG Corps in the Navy, and I believe in the other services, the judge advocates are set up as a separate corps. In other words, they're almost completely separate from the rest of their military branch. They go through different training and everything. One of the reasons I picked the Marine Corps is because it does not have a separate JAG Corps. Judge advocates are trained as infantry officers, just like pilots and logistics officers and tank drivers. And so we had to go through all the same training, which I think is interesting also from even, the general topic of your podcast, because the Marine Corps knows that at its core, it's all about the infantry. And so they figure that nobody can play a supporting role if you haven't also done the job. And so unlike in the other services, judge advocates in the Marine Corps go through the same infantry training, and we're trained as infantry platoon commanders. So anyway, I always like to give that distinction. Actually, just to take that one step further, there was a movie a while back with Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson called Rules of Engagement. And if anyone watches that, that is much closer to real life from a Marine judge advocate's perspective. I don't know why I just went off on that tangent, but anyway.
Because it's fun and it's interesting.
Yeah.
At least for like those of us that are, I was never in the military, but I grew up in a military town. My dad was Air Force. Both my grandfathers fought on opposite sides of World War II. I had uncles in the military. My husband was military. My brother-in-law was military. So I'm always fascinated with people that served in different roles. And to your point, everybody has a part to play. And I love that thought process of, you can't be support if you haven't done the job. And so many times that gets a little bit lost even in the corporate space.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, even just before we started recording, you and I were talking about in your current business now, getting the engineering team and the implementation team talking with each other. When I did my first startup back in '98, it was a software development company. And I didn't know how to code. I didn't know any of that stuff. That was my co-founder's strength. But I thought, if I'm going to be CEO of this little startup, I got to know something about what these coders are doing. So before we even launched it, this is how old I am. Back then, I started teaching myself HTML, and how to create
Yeah.
websites, just straight HTML. And that helped a little bit later when I was managing a bunch of developers, and I wasn't the CTO or the VP of engineering, but as the CEO, at least they knew that I appreciated what they were doing. And flash forward to when we co-founded OceanGate in 2009, we knew we were going to be doing submersible operations, and we knew we were going to be hiring pilots, sub-pilots. And so as the CEO, I figured, if I'm gonna manage a bunch of sub-pilots, I may as well know what it takes to be a sub-pilot. So I got trained as a sub-pilot, and I think I have over 70 dives in one of our first subs. But yeah, I think it was just part of that Marine Corps mentality of, how do you become a good leader? Is you have to know what everyone in the organization is doing.
One of the things when you and I first met, we spent a lot of time talking about a servant mindset as a leader. And
Yes.
you had this really fascinating story to me about an all-nighter that your team had to run. And you, just like you were saying, hey, I wasn't the coder, I wasn't the one that could actually do all the work, but there were things that I could do to support the associates and that kind of all-nighter mindset of, hey, we got to get this done, we got this deadline. Can you maybe share that a little bit of that story with the audience?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you remember that. But now, since we're talking about the Marine Corps, maybe I'll start with that a little bit first. One of the interesting things about Marines is, they really teach leadership, both to the enlisted and to the officers, because for Marines, it's not a rank thing, right? It's kind of a respect thing, and it's interesting for the officers. You go through officer candidate school or however it is that you got through the screening process to become commissioned as second lieutenant, and then you all show up at the basic school in Quantico, Virginia for 6 months of infantry officer training. You're all second lieutenants, but for 6 months you have to learn how to become a leader. And the only way to do that is to take turns being in leadership positions, right? They kind of walk all the students through. They rotate them through. 1 week you're company commander, the next week you're a platoon commander, and you play all the different roles. And one thing that it teaches you is the key to becoming a good leader is, first you got to be a good follower. Like, as a second lieutenant, you can't, like, going through the basic school, you can't be, hey, this week I'm company commander, so all of you have to do whatever I say, because the next week you're going to be playing the role of, a rifleman or something, and you've got 5 ranks above you. And so it was an interesting exercise for 6 months being in the support role. You had to learn how to be in the support role, because then when you were in the leadership role, you wanted everybody to support you the same way that you supported them. So anyway, just with that as background, the anecdote you were talking about was back when we had our software development startup. We had a big deadline coming up on a deliverable to a client, and it got to a point where our team had to pull an all-nighter to meet the deadline at like 9 a.m. on a Friday morning to deliver to the client. And the only way this was going to happen was for everyone to just stay overnight in the office and just get things done. And at the time I was CEO, I think we had like 25 people in the company, but it was a small team, about 5 or 6, that stayed overnight to deliver this project to the client. And we had the technical team, we had a QA person, but they were working in 1-hour sprints. And they would code for like 45 minutes, and then they'd check all their code in, and then there'd be 15 minutes of user testing, and then they would go at it again for another 45 minutes or so. And so I felt like I couldn't just leave the office and leave these guys in the office overnight to code. So I stayed with them overnight. There was not much I could do since I wasn't a coder, but during the 15 minutes of user testing, that's where I stepped in, right? I was the guinea pig, and I did all the user testing while they took 15-minute power naps. And then during the 45 minutes when they would test on everything that I found, I was trying to be helpful, trying to figure out how to keep them going. So I was the one in charge of running out and getting them pizza and getting them Red Bulls and, getting them blankets if they needed, whatever it was that they needed while they were coding to make them as comfortable as possible. Um, and it's funny because for me, it just felt like that's the right thing to do. And it was the only way that as a team we were going to deliver. But I think all of them later really appreciated the fact that I was even there, let alone actually doing anything for them. But anyway, that was one of my early experiences on the whole notion of servant leadership.
Yeah. And I bet you those individuals, they remember that positive experience of their boss, their leader being there, even though maybe you couldn't go and code by their side, you were providing a service to them. Just like people have memories, like myself, I have memories of leaders that just like would leave. And you got the infantry, you got the frontline folks doing all the stuff, making the copies, building the packets, putting them in boxes, doing all this stuff the night before a big deliverable, and the main person decided to walk. So you remember both the positive leadership, and you also remember some of the absent bosses.
Yeah, it's funny now that you're talking through it. I'm also thinking of this kind of applied on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 3 kids that are now grown. They're 25, 23, and 19. But growing up, as they were growing up, I was either working a lot at a startup or I was traveling a lot. And I always felt like I was absent, like I wasn't there as much as I should have been or as much as I wanted to be. So, for example, my 2 boys both played soccer, and I got to coach one of them on a couple of times, but I didn't get to coach the other one. And I always felt like, oh, I'm not one of these dads, that would coach the kids' soccer team and be that actively involved. And the best I could do is I would go to all their games, and when I was home, I would take them to their practices. And I always felt bad that, let's say, I would take them to a practice, and during the practice, I'd be pacing around the sidelines. I'd be watching them, but I'd be pacing around the sidelines on phone calls. I'd have some business calls while I was there. And I always felt bad that I was distracted and I wasn't fully immersed in what they were doing. And then someone told me, yeah, but you got to remember your kids aren't going to remember how active you were. The kids are just going to remember that you were there, that you took them to practice and took them back and brought them back. Because a lot of parents don't even get a chance to do that.
That's right.
And someone, when they told me that, I realized, wow, they're right. When I realized at those practices where I was pacing around on the phone watching them, there was maybe 1 or 2 other parents there out of 20 kids on the team. Everyone else either got a ride from someone else, rode their bikes there, or the parents came, dropped them off, and left, or some other thing. So, and that's when I realized, oh, I guess there's something to that as well. So I think maybe this whole notion of servant leadership also translates even into parenting, right? Where you're serving your kids, but you're trying to get them to grow into be, leaders or adults, functioning adults, law-abiding adults, healthy adults. So
You're raising adults, not kids, is what my husband and I always say. Like that's our mission is to raise good adults, not great kids. And that thought process of you're present, you're kind of creating a work-life integration by being on a phone, but being there with the kids, I think does actually prove a benefit. Like I look at those opportunities of you're in the car, you're driving them there. There's things that are said, there's experiences that are made, jokes that are made in that little microcosm of time versus the hour that they're on the field anyway, because they're running around. Like they're not right. So there's those other moments of transition or where some of that magic.
Well, you just reminded me of another anecdote. Actually, again, one of the defining moments, and I'm surprised I haven't thought about this in years. So to kind of date myself a little bit, the first quote unquote smartphone that I ever got was a BlackBerry. And the reason I got a BlackBerry is because I was doing some work for a consulting client. And this was like a solo consulting gig that I was doing. And I was helping the team at the client site with a deliverable of a new website, let's just say, that was coming up and it was launching. And a big part of my job was to help the team get that site launched properly and on time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem is it ended up being a couple weeks behind schedule. And that wouldn't have been a problem, except that the launch date was now going to coincide with my older child's, my daughter's eighth birthday, and 10th birthday. 8th birthday. It was her 8th birthday. And we had promised her that we would take her to Disney World for her 8th birthday. And all of a sudden I'm coming up and realizing I can't go. Like I can't, either I go on the trip with my daughter and fail my client, or I stay to do well by my client, but then I ditch my daughter on her 8th birthday. And so I decided, wait a sec, there's this thing called a BlackBerry. Maybe, I can just deal with that and I'll just be able to get texts and emails and do that. So that's what we ended up doing. We went to Disney World, and I still remember the day of the launch, we were at Disney World standing in line in these long lines for like Space Mountain or for whatever it was. It was like an hour and a half long line. And the kids are all hanging over me and, we're playing and doing all this. But every 30 seconds I was checking the BlackBerry and checking. And then every now and then I'd have to reply to an email. And the launch got done. And I felt bad because I was not paying attention to my kids, during the hour and a half we were standing in line. But I had to at least tell myself, but we're at Disney World, and I'm with them. They probably don't even remember that I was on my BlackBerry during that time. I remember, but they probably don't remember. All they remember is they got to go to Space Mountain.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, I just, it's funny because I haven't thought of that in years, and it just kind of popped in my head. But
it's the grace that I think that we would expect others to have grace with us, but we don't always have that same grace with ourselves. Right. And so, when I think of, leading a team, the grace I would want somebody to give me is the grace I want to give my team. And then somewhere in the middle that'll connect and I'll be able to give myself that same grace. It's hard, but I think that's kind of the beauty of being able to go back and reflect on some of those moments is really, really important. So, one of the things as well that resonated with me when we met last time is we were talking about motivation and motivating teams. And so it's interesting, when we met last time, I was with a Fortune 50 company. Now I'm at a tech startup. And sometimes those motivations of corporate type of typical, Fortune 50 companies, motivation of those associates is different sometimes than those that are drawn to working for a startup. How do you go about understanding what motivates others to create those long lasting ride or die people, for you?
I think, in fact, we may have discussed this last time too. I think that's goes to the core of servant leadership, which is empathy. Like you can't do anything without empathy. And I've had discussions with a lot of people over the years who think they're empathetic and they really aren't, because they think that empathy is just looking at things through the other person's eyes. But that's only half of it. In fact, that's probably the easiest half, which is looking at something through someone else's eyes. You can't just look at it through their eyes with your brain. You have to look at it through their eyes and their brain. And that's difficult to do. So to answer your question, a lot of what I do is get to know people and as people and their motivations as much as I can, right? Depending on the setting, right? Excuse me. And that involves, like, even when I advise or mentor entrepreneurs, and I'll ask them, what is it you want to get out of this? Like, why did you start this company? Right. And they always start with, the market opportunity and, the technology innovation, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. Why did you start this company? You as a person, like, this is startups eat up all your time. They take up your life. You work 100-hour weeks. They become your number one baby.
Mm.
And 90, 95, 98%, whatever the statistic is, of them fail.
Mm-hmm.
So why in your right mind are you doing this? Like, what is it you want? I think the most hilarious answer I ever got from someone was this guy who's like in his early 40s. He had been a senior executive at some big companies. He was a sales executive. And I asked him, I went down this path with him and I said, no, you personally, like, why did you start this?
Hey, listeners. I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am. If you're finding value in these insights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you're listening. Your support helps us reach more people and bring even more inspiring guests to the show. Let's keep building this incredible community together.
And that involves, like, even when I advise or mentor entrepreneurs, and I'll ask them, what is it you want to get out of this? Like, why did you start this company? Right. And they always start with the market opportunity and the technology innovation, blah blah blah. And I'm like, no. Why did you start this company? You as a person. Like, this is, startups eat up all your time. They take up your life. You work 100-hour weeks. They become your number one baby. And 90, 95, 98%, whatever the statistic is, of them fail. So why in your right mind are you doing this? Like, what is it you want? I think the most hilarious answer I ever got from someone was this guy who's like in his early 40s. He had been a senior executive at some big companies. He was a sales executive. And I asked him, I went down this path with him and I said, no, you personally, like, why did you start this? And he said, well, I've got 3 young kids, all under the age of 8. And with my job, I work and travel so much that I never get to see my kids. So I figured I'll start this company so I can see my kids more. And I had to just fight not breaking out laughing when he said that, because let me know how that goes. Cause like now you may see your kids, but you won't be present with your kids. Cause in your head, you're going to be thinking about the startup all the time. So anyway, the bottom line is just trying to understand people as people and see what it is that they want to get out of it. If they're employees, it's not like, what are you looking for in this job? It's what are you looking for in life that this job will help you achieve?
Yeah.
Which reminds me of another anecdote in that same first software company. At the time in 98, 99, 2000 in Silicon Valley, it was all about giving employees stock options. That was like the big thing. It's like, yeah, you can lowball them on the salary because you're giving them stock options that are going to make them millionaires in 18 months when we go public, right? All that craziness. And so my co-founder and I just did what everyone else did. We set aside stock for a stock option pool. We gave everybody stock options, blah, 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 blah. So then as the company started growing and we started adding more people and shifting people around and giving people promotions, whatever it was, and doing performance reviews, coming from the Marine Corps mentality, I actually implemented some of the corporate things, like position descriptions and org charts and performance reviews and all that. And we started doing performance reviews and trying to figure out promotions and all that. And an interesting thing happened is I actually sat down and talked with individuals as we went. Turns out of all the employees in the company, only one of them actually cared about their stock options. Only one was motivated by stock options.
Yeah.
Everyone else was motivated by different things. One of them was motivated by cash. One of them was motivated by title. One of them was, so instead of giving one of the engineers a promotion and giving him more money and stock options, which is what we were planning on doing, all we did is change his title from engineer to lead engineer. From software engineer to senior software engineer, and he was happy. He got a promotion, right? Others were motivated by learning new skills. Some of them were motivated by working with clients directly, and they hadn't been before. Some of them wanted to get out of coding and wanted to get into like project management or marketing or biz dev. Like, they were all motivated by different things. And yet we were taking the one size fits all stock option approach for motivating people. And so I think after that exercise, when we changed what we were doing, we didn't take anyone's stock options away, but the one guy who was motivated by stock options, we gave him more stock options. We didn't give anyone else more stock options because they didn't care. But we gave somebody else a title change. We gave somebody else more cash. We gave, whatever it was. We just had to find the right trigger point for what motivates people. Likewise, like, flash forward again to like Ocean Gate. Some people wanted to be out on the water. Some of them wanted to work with the subs themselves. Some of them were perfectly fine staying behind and just be working on the business side of things. It was just a matter of what was going to help people get to the whatever it was they thought the next stage in their life was going to be.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that you started implementing, annual reviews and job descriptions, because if being in my new role, that's something we're doing right now, right? Is for the first time ever, we're going to have an annual review process, right? And it's been very interesting because we've talked a lot about what are people's superpowers and why don't we lean into that? So even though their title might be over here, if their superpowers over here, don't ding them for this, put them more towards what their superpower is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny because so that first startup, I think our employee number 8 was an HR director. And I had to fight with my co-founder on that. He's a technologist. He's like, "What the heck do we need an HR director for as an 8th employee?" I said, "Well, we're planning on hiring like 30 more people in the next few months. Like, we need an HR person." "We don't need an HR person." Anyway, whatever. He deferred to me. We hired her. Like 2 weeks after she was there, he came into my desk and he said, "How the heck did we ever get along without Amy?" It's like, well, so she was employee number 8. We grew the company. Then we ended up selling the company to a larger venture-backed company that had raised like $45 million. They had 150 employees. By the time we did the transaction, I think we only took about 30 of us across to the new company. So my big role after the transaction was making sure that my team was taken care of as they integrated into the acquiring team. And they were having all sorts of issues with the integration, with the insurance, with the paychecks, with everything. So I went over and I sat down with the HR director of the new company. And I said, "Kim, what is going on? Why are we having so many problems?" And she just rolled her eyes and she said, "Look, your HR director was employee number 8. I was hired 3 months ago, and this company's 3 years old. I was employee number 143."
Yeah.
She says, "So your team is used to position descriptions, org charts, reporting structures, health benefits, regular reviews, employee manuals, like all this stuff that Amy put in place, last year." Says, "My team with 150, some of these people have gone like 3 years working without a pay raise, without a performance review, without knowing who they report to."
Yeah.
It was the craziness of the time, right? You get given a bunch of money from VCs and you're just expected to go, no time for structure. But it was interesting culture clash, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and those culture clashes, I think, can happen anywhere. It could be, even if you're in a larger corporation, you merge 2 teams, your boss moves somewhere else. Now you have a new boss and they come to the table with a completely different philosophy on how a team community should be built and pulled together. So, is there something or an advice you would give to a new leader that now is experiencing that for the first time? Or like, "Oh, I have just inherited this whole other team. I didn't hire them. I didn't pick them. I didn't do anything. And I got to merge them with my existing team that already knows like how we do stuff and how we approach the community of work." Right. Like, is there any kind of tidbits of advice you would give to somebody that's new in that space?
I don't know. Here, I'll just think on the fly because I don't know if I've ever been in that position. I've been on the other side of that position where I transitioned my team over to someone else.
Yeah.
But if I had to do it from the other side where I was inheriting a team, I think it still just comes back to empathy, right?
Yeah.
It's like, look, you're looking at them like they're the new kids that are coming in and playing with your kids, and you've got to integrate them, and they're going to disrupt your flow and your mojo that you set up with this other team. But look at it from their perspective. Like
Yeah.
they're probably scared, like they don't know you. They just lost their boss that they were used to working with.
Mhm.
They're not sure. They're like the new kids at school, right? Like
Yeah.
they don't know what the clicks are and what the peculiarities are, and they're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing at the wrong time in front of the wrong person. And so you got to get to know them and treat them like they're your new hires, like you
Yeah.
just hired them yourself.
So the last question I have for you is going to be a little bit of a pivot. I know that you've had a lifelong interest in space. You're doing all this ocean exploration. What are you excited about in the next 5 years on that kind of adventure of like the unknown?
Well, I think in general, one of the so let's backtrack. Within my lifelong excitement about space and oceans and stuff, um, different people are, a lot of people share that same passion, but for different reasons, right? So you got to get to know them, right? So when I meet a space person and they say, "Oh, I've been excited about space since I was a kid," I always ask them, "But what is it about space that excites you?" Right?
Yeah.
For some people, it's the science. For some people, it's just the wonder of it all, right? For some people, it's the engineering challenges of going there. For me, it's about physically going, right? It's about
Mm.
human exploration, human space flight. Likewise, for my fascination with the ocean, right? So that's why I helped start OceanGate, because my co-founder and I both have that same fascination with physically going underwater.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that love the ocean and have no desire to go down there at all, because they know how dangerous it is, or they know how scary it is, or whatever. Okay, so with that as context, that what excites me is the human part of this. In general, one of the things that I've loved seeing over the last 20 years, but specifically over the last 10 years, is this whole meta trend of technology innovation and entrepreneurship
Mm.
that started maybe with software and then expanded into other areas. Over the last 10 years, it's really hit the fields of generally what I would categorize as human transportation systems.
Mhm.
So this includes things like air taxis or autonomous automobiles, right? Self-driving cars, suborbital vehicles, supersonic planes, stratospheric balloons, and then, with my ocean background, submersibles, right? A lot of that has happened over the last 10, 20, 15, 20 years. So in general, what excites me is that now, um, humans are going to have more and more new ways of getting from point A to point B, or new point B's to go to, right? Like the thing I always say is, Elon. Everyone always says Elon Musk runs a space company with SpaceX, and forgetting for a fact that he doesn't actually run SpaceX. His president, Gwynne Shotwell, runs it.
Yep.
Gwynne doesn't run a space company. There's no such thing as a space company. What she runs is a transportation services company. Her customers pay her to take their payloads, whether human or otherwise, from point A to point B. It just happens that point B for her customers is in space,
Mhm.
right? For OceanGate, it was the same thing. We figured we had a charter business where customers pay us to take them from point A to point B. It just happens that point B is underwater.
Mhm.
So anyway, on a meta level, what excites me is that humans are having are over the next 5-10 years are going to have greater choice of different ways of getting from point A to point B, and new point Bs to go to. Specifically within space, what excites me over the next 5 years is the development of Starship for
Mhm.
SpaceX,
Mhm.
which I think even people in the space industry don't fully appreciate what a seismic shift that's going to be.
Yeah.
Like even if you see, even if you know nothing about this, if you've seen anything about Starship in the media or whatever, there's always graphics that show how big Starship is compared to the Apollo Saturn V
Yeah.
rockets. And it's always that Starship stacked on top of its booster is bigger than Saturn V was. But that's not the right comparison. The right comparison is the ship that is being launched by that booster by SpaceX, the Starship itself, the one that actually has been the one crashing during the tests, is the equivalent of the Apollo capsule that was sitting on top of the Saturn V rocket. So the way someone described it, everyone keeps saying, why is SpaceX having such a tough time with this whole Starship thing? Didn't we land on the moon 60 years ago? Like that was so easy. It's like, yeah, that was easy because what we landed on the moon 60 years ago was basically the size of like a minivan.
Yeah.
And what SpaceX is trying to land on the moon is the size of a 20-story building.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think people forget that sense of scale, even within the space community. And so if you think about it that way, they're very close to being able to launch and land a 20-story building when the previous we'd ever done before is a minivan.
Yeah.
And so, and that will happen within the next 5 years. So that's something that's really got me excited. And that's going to just fundamentally change everything. Like if you know nothing about space, maybe you know that there's an International Space Station and that there's some astronauts up there. Well, the maximum capacity of the International Space Station is something like 6 people, maybe in an emergency 9 people. Well, Starship can take up 100 people at a time. And the most humans we've ever launched at any one time in the history of humanity was 7 people that we used to launch on the space shuttle. Now you're going to have a spacecraft that can launch 100 at a time. And the shuttle used to launch twice a year. So you'd send 14 people up per year. Well, Starship can send 100 people at a time, and they're gearing up to be able to do this on a weekly basis, maybe on a daily basis. So what are you going to do with a space station that can only hold 6?
Right.
All of this is going to be shifting over the next 5 years. So
that's
what's
exciting.
got me excited.
It really is.
Sorry, I went off for a while on that, but that's my thing, right? That's
yeah,
my
no,
world.
that's exciting. It's an interesting perspective that you don't necessarily, at least for me, haven't seen on the news, to be able to have that visual and the comparison of where we were, where we are going is that's a big shift that I had never really thought of before. So
I think that's
cool.
and I think that's why it'll hit everyone. To quote one of my favorite people, it'll hit everyone bigly in the next few years when they start seeing the results of that. Because right now, when you just watch it, like every time there's a SpaceX launch or something in the media with SpaceX, I always get all my friends messaging me going, "Wait, I don't get it. What's the big deal? Like that just looks like every other launch." And that I said, you'll see, don't worry, you'll see, when they get this and you see the implications of it, within the next 5 years, that's when it'll hit you. Right? When you see the Starship, it's not going to happen, but if you saw the Starship finally launch into orbit and pull up next to the space station, you'll see how big this thing is compared to the space station.
Oh, that's cool. That's really, thank you for that. It's an interesting topic, and it's something that I think a lot of like the lay people, I'll put myself in a lay category for that, would not have known. But because that's your passion, that's where you go, you really kind of thrive and get excited about. It's that excitement that you just had, like, oh wow, that's pretty, that sounds actually really exciting.
Well, but even
Hmm.
but like even if you bring all that back to Might in Motion, I mean, think about Might in Motion, right? The audacity that Elon had to start SpaceX 20 years ago. Because by the way, everything that I just described that's going to happen in the next 5 years, that's still only like, I don't know, less than 1% of Elon's vision for SpaceX. So imagine, the audacity of like starting something like that and inspiring so many people to come work for you, to give you money, to invest in you, to do all these things. Gwynne Shotwell's like the leading executive in the aerospace industry, and she was probably one of the leading executives before she went to work for Elon at SpaceX. to get her to risk her career to go do
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just, and then everything that she did to actually build SpaceX into like a functioning business that it is today. I mean, both of those, like, might in motion, to the
Yeah.
20th, 100th degree. It's just
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, when I left, the corporate space and a Fortune 50 to go to a tech startup, people thought I was a little bit crazy, but I'm so, like, you get excited at space, I get excited about supply chain, right? And I see
Yeah.
what we're doing at Vector, and I'm like, oh my God, we are going to totally change how supply chains interact. Not just this one warehouse, but how do they interact with the driver, with the production facility, with stores, where you end up creating this network. And I
Yeah.
almost look at it like cells that are now starting to connect, where now you've got portals of information because you've been able to digitize portions of supply chain that before was all so manual. Now you have the power to really be able to do stuff. I can now go and like look and actually get into things like theft, like, how do I get more effective and efficient with moving a truck? Because a truck driver gets paid by the wheels turning. And then eventually, to your point, autonomous vehicles, what do you do then? You don't have somebody who hands off paperwork because everything's autonomous, or a portion of your business is and a portion of it isn't. So how do you start interacting? And
Right.
that's where I got excited. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is going to be something that will change the industry. And I'm coming into it from the perspective of not a tech person. I'm coming from the perspective of, oh, I'm just a dumb trucker, but I know I can change people's lives for the better through what we're doing at Vector, which is just really cool. Like, I think that's where
Yeah.
the excitement
But
comes in, when you can actually buy into that.
yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, this is an audio podcast, right? So,
It's a little bit of, some people watch on YouTube, but yeah, I do like
oh,
my,
okay.
yeah, I
Just to
do
make sure
air
that
quotes,
people saw that you did air
dumb
quotes when
truckers
you
and air
said
quotes.
dumb trucker. Yeah, you didn't really mean dumb trucker. Yeah, I know.
Some people
Just to be
watch on
clear.
Spotify and some people watch on YouTube, Guillermo. You never
Okay,
know. You
but
never know. But
just
you're right. Thank you for
for
calling me out on that.
yeah, for anyone listening to the audio, she did not actually mean dumb trucker.
No.
um no, it's funny, the whole thing of you being excited about supply chain. I was laughing because I've got a few friends in supply chain management, and it's hilarious because supply chain management is one of these things that nobody, unless you're actually doing it, nobody thinks about
Until it goes wrong.
until you
Mhm.
have problems, like
That's
during
right.
the pandemic.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden people like couldn't get things and they couldn't figure out why. And
Yep.
then the media is saying, oh, it's because there's this whole problems in supply chain. And everyone's like, what's supply
Supply
chain? What are you
chain.
guys talking
Yeah.
about?
And I mean,
Well,
I
now
had the
you know.
beautiful privilege of living through that. And I had a
Yeah.
great VP. Uh, Michelle Livingstone is her name, and she would always say, "Never waste a good crisis." So every time you have a
Yeah.
crisis in supply chain, you're going to level up. You're going to get more effective, more efficient. You're going to find opportunities to help others because it really is a people business. And yeah, yeah. So Guillermo, if people are like, "Wow, I'm really excited about what you were talking about. I want to learn more about space or ocean or some of your other initiatives," what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah. So what I tried doing is because in a way, like you say, you make it sound like I've got a diversified life, and I just look at it like I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off, spinning a bunch of plates. So what I tried doing a while back is I consolidated everything as much as possible in my personal website. So
Mhm.
söhnlein.com, that's probably the easiest way. If someone wants to connect with me directly, LinkedIn is probably the best way to do it. However, if you're going to connect with me through that, at least send me a message in there that says that it was through the Might in Motion podcast, or else I probably
Yeah.
won't even look at it. I definitely won't respond to it. So.
And for those of you listening, the website is www.sohnlein.com. So great opportunity. It'll also be in the show notes for wherever you're listening so that you can click on it and reach out directly to Guillermo. This has been a really fascinating conversation for me. I loved, we touched on a few different things. I'm going to highlight because everybody knows I've got to have my handy pen where I'm scribbling down notes. But we started off with your background in the military and how being in the Marine Corps, that everybody had to learn infantry no matter what your role was, because you can't support others if you haven't really done the job or been exposed to the job. And you carried that with you throughout your career. And even if you were just learning HTML for code, it gave an appreciation, it gave a knowledge of those other individuals you were going to be leading. We talked as well around, in the Marines, they teach leadership. It's not about the rank, but it's about respect. And you can take that with you wherever you are by making sure you have, a good understanding of other people. We talked about kind of the all-nighter, right? Where you were the QA tester for 15 minutes and everybody else 45 minutes of code. And it was this rotation overnight. But that was the gift you could bring to the table, was being that other person to kind of help crack the code, maybe bring drinks, bring food, and support those on your team that were doing, all the heavy lifting. We talked more about servant leadership, which that leads into, and that's not just having empathy by looking through others' eyes, but also trying to understand their perspective on the issue is what's going to take you all the way. Understanding their personal reasons of their why, their motivation, and how you can factor that in to drive their excitement to the team and to the mission. We also talked a little bit about raising kids and how sometimes we feel like we're just not giving enough to our kids because we might be on the road or we're doing things, but they're going to remember that you were there, even if maybe you were on the phone while you were there at that practice, that game. They're going to remember the transition period of time where you were able to have those conversations, and it allowed you to leverage technology to actually integrate with your personal life. And then finally, we just had a really good conversation about science and about what you're excited about in the next few years, which is getting people, into space, into deep ocean, and that humans are going to have new ways to travel to get to wherever point B is. But maybe there's newer, deeper, further away destinations that we'll be able to get to in the next 5 years. So this was a really exciting conversation, Guillermo, and I appreciate you making time to be part of the Might in Motion podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Man, we covered a lot of ground. I didn't even realize we covered that much. Yeah, that's great.
It's been a journey.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being part of this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Might in Motion. Remember, every step forward counts, and the power to create momentum starts with you. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. It makes a huge difference. Until next time, stay inspired, stay mindful, and keep moving with might.